just so you know, it's not the programmers and it's not the booth operators. Everyone's doing fine. Some things are out of sequence. In 2003, prior to the invasion of Iraq, a group of people trained as Christian peacemaker team went to Iraq. They knew what was probably going to be happening. And they went there with the express idea of connecting with the Iraqi people outside of the military aspects of what was going to happen, and saying to them that there was another way in which people wanted to relate to them. They had been there a while when the invasion started. And after a bit of time, they were in the process of moving from one place to another by a caravan of cars. And the lead car looked up in their mirror, and one car was missing. So they turned around, all of them, and they went back, and here were the occupants of that car coming up out of a ravine. They had hit a piece of shrapnel and run off the road into the ravine, and they were injured. What do? They're in a different country. They're out away from everyone, and there's a war going on. And they're injured. Some locals came by and stopped. And they picked up the injured and they took them into the nearby town, to a doctor's home. The other folks followed, and they were there with them. And as the doctor began to examine them, he looked at them and said, 3 weeks ago you bombed our hospital. I will treat you here at home. He treated them. And as they were all getting ready to leave, they said, what can we do to repay you? How do we pay you for what you've done? He said, the only thing I ask of you is to tell others what happened here tonight. The name of that town is Rutbah. You and I have opportunities every day to encounter the grace of God. Sometimes it comes through various ways, but you and I, every day of our lives, have the opportunity to observe the grace of God at work in our lives. The grace of God was at work for these 10 lepers who came to see Jesus. Now let's be clear that when you and I think of leprosy, we think of leprosy. But when the folks during Jesus' time talked about leprosy, they talked about leprosy. They talked about chicken pox, measles, your garden variety psoriasis or seborrhea, or acne. Anything that was an eruption on the skin was considered leprosy. And for that, if you had it, you were isolated from everyone. And if you were walking down the street and someone was coming towards you on your side, you walked over to the other side, you covered your eyes, and you said, leprosy, leprosy, which I believe is a clear violation of HIPAA. But they didn't care. So 10 lepers, whatever was wrong with them, came to see Jesus. These people were unclean by virtue of their skin situation. And Jesus healed every one of those people. That's not the story. Jesus healed a whole lot of people. The story of this gospel is not that he healed them. It's what happened next. You see, 9 of them, when they were healed, turned around and went away. Now, before you're too hard on them, let me tell you, I think I can understand why they would do it. One would be if I had a friend who was a leper, maybe I would be wanting to run away and tell him to go back and see this guy. Man, have I got a specialist for you? Or the other is that the only way, once you're cured of leprosy, that you can become a part of the community again, be alive again, is if a priest pronounces you clean. So maybe I would want to run straight to a priest. Either way, I can understand these guys walking away, but the one who turned around and came to Jesus was a foreigner. A foreigner who was doubly unclean. And he came to Jesus and expressed his gratitude for God's grace in his life. You and I, every day of our lives have the opportunity to observe God's grace in our lives. Later in 2003, part of the group from this peacemaking team, the whole team had come back to the United States, and part of the group was from North Carolina, and they found themselves in Durham, North Carolina, in one of the poorest, most violent sections of town. And they took up residence in a house across the street from a church that was something of a community center for this part of town. And there together they began to form a community of prayer and action. Daily they would gather for their prayers together. They lived together. They shared all that they had together. And they spent their time out in the neighborhood, sitting on porches, on their porch, on other people's porches, walking up and down the street. They got to know the people of that area. And if it were dinner time and they were eating and someone came to the door, they came on in and they could sit down and eat with them. It didn't matter who they were. They could sit down and eat with them right there. And if they came in and they were in the midst of their prayers, they could sit down with them and they could pray with them. And if they had a particular need that they needed addressed, they could come in and meet with someone and talk with them about them. They became advocates for that community and for those people. In the time since that, since 2003, there are now 3 houses. They all live together. People come and go living there. People come and go to get what they need. The name of this ministry is Rutbah House, a place of prayer and hospitality that carries on what happened in Iraq in 2003. Every day, you and I can observe God's grace in our lives. Sometimes it's those huge events, those miraculous things that are so important to us. And we go, God's grace? sometimes they're so minuscule that we don't realize them until days or weeks or months or years later. But every day, you and I have the opportunity to observe God's grace in our lives. Now, I can perform like the 9 folks and go away thinking maybe, well, I got what I deserve finally after all of this time, or something else, some other way of viewing it. Or I can begin to orient myself to understand my true gratitude for God's grace in my life. I almost decided to use this little phrase throughout this homily, but I felt like it would fit much better in the 1990s than now. I was going to say gratitude is attitude. Your moment of grace in this homily is that I didn't do that. But I can choose to walk away from those graceful moments and just say anything I want to, or I can turn around and I can give thanks for what I have in my life. I can develop an attitude of gratitude. Ooh, I can choose to be grateful for God's presence in my life. Now, that's important. One, it's not easy to do. I think we have a natural proclivity to begin to talk about what we don't have and how awful our day was without ever getting to that point. But the difficult part is to begin to claim that and to live it out every day, every day, every day. And if we do, it transforms us, but it also transforms how we see others that are around us, who are the ones who bear God's grace to us. So what will it be? What will it be? Which group are you going to choose to belong to? The ones who see God's grace in your lives and turn around and walk away for whatever good and perfect reason? Or are you going to be somebody who looks and sees God moving in your life and gives thanks? I, for one, am going to choose to express gratitude.